Sometimes the only person who believed in you is gone, and all you have left is what they left behind. For Noah Wells, that was a falling-down cabin in the Louisiana swamp that everyone said wasn't worth saving. The neighbors laughed when they saw him packing his truck with tools. His 9-year-old daughter, Junie, sat quietly beside him, watching her dad chase another impossible dream. That cabin's been underwater for years, they said. Just let it go. But Noah couldn't let go. His grandmother was the only family who ever stood by him. Now, wading through murky water toward the broken porch, he spotted something under the rotting floorboards. Something that would change everything. What could possibly be hidden beneath a flooded cabin that an entire town wanted him to abandon? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning after the funeral, Noah Wells sat at his kitchen table, staring at a crumpled envelope his grandmother had pressed into his hand 3 days before she passed. Inside was a single key and a handwritten note that simply read, "The cabin holds more than memories, my dear boy. Look beneath what others see." At 42, Noah had grown accustomed to disappointment. His ex-wife had taken half of everything when she left 2 years ago, including most of his confidence. The handyman business he'd built from nothing barely covered rent on their small apartment in Baton Rouge. Some months, he chose between fixing his truck or buying Junie new school clothes. He usually chose the clothes. "Daddy, are we really going to Grandma Meredith's cabin?" Junie asked, spooning cereal around her bowl without much enthusiasm. At 9, she had her grandmother's thoughtful eyes and her father's stubborn chin. She'd been quieter since the funeral, processing grief in that careful way children do when they're trying to protect the adults around them. "We're going to take a look," Noah said, folding the note and slipping it back into his wallet. "See what's there." Mama said it was just a falling-down shack in the middle of nowhere. Noah's jaw tightened at the mention of his ex-wife. Rebecca had never understood his connection to his grandmother, dismissing the old woman as eccentric and their visits to the cabin as wasted weekends. Looking back, Noah realized those criticisms should have been warnings about their marriage. "Your mama didn't know Grandma Meredith like we did," he said gently. "Sometimes the most important things look broken from the outside." The drive to Terrebonne Parish took 3 hours through increasingly rural Louisiana landscape. Spanish moss draped the oak trees like old lace curtains, and the air grew thick with humidity and the earthy smell of wetlands. Junie pressed her face to the window, watching great blue herons wade through roadside ditches. "I remember the way," she said softly as they turned onto a narrow gravel road that disappeared into thick cypress trees. "Grandma Meredith used to make us count the mile markers." Noah smiled despite his worry. His grandmother had turned everything into a gentle lesson or game. She'd taught Junie to identify birds by their calls, to read cloud formations, to find beauty in weathered wood and rusted metal. "Nothing in nature is truly broken," she used to say, "just changing into something new." The cabin sat exactly where Noah remembered, though time and weather had not been kind. What had once been a modest 2-room structure on sturdy pilings now tilted precariously over dark water that lapped at the front steps. The tin roof sagged in the middle, and several boards had fallen away from the exterior walls, leaving gaps like missing teeth. But it wasn't completely underwater, as the neighbors had claimed. The back half of the cabin remained above the waterline, and the stone chimney stood straight and strong, pointing toward a sky that threatened rain. "It's smaller than I remembered," Junie said, climbing out of the truck. "Everything seems bigger when you're little," Noah replied, but he was thinking the same thing. The cabin had loomed large in his childhood memoria, magical place where his grandmother told stories about plants that could heal anything and water that remembered everything it touched. Noah's grandmother had lived here for 70 years, ever since she'd married his grandfather fresh out of high school. She'd raised 3 children in these 2 rooms, including Noah's father, who'd left for the oil rigs and never looked back. When Noah's parents died in a car accident when he was 12, Grandmother Meredith had driven to Baton Rouge in her ancient Ford pickup and loaded him into the passenger seat without a word of discussion. "Your daddy always felt too big for this place," she'd told him during one of their long afternoons on the cabin's porch. "But size isn't about square footage, Noah. It's about how much love you can fit inside." Those had been the best years of his life. 6 years of learning to fish in the early morning mist, of helping his grandmother tend her extensive herb garden, of listening to her stories about the old days when the land was different. She'd sent him to LSU on her savings, watched him marry Rebecca, celebrated when Junie was born. Even when Rebecca made visits difficult, Grandmother Meredith had found ways to stay connected. Now she was gone, and Noah was standing knee-deep in brown water, trying to figure out how to honor her memory without bankrupting his future. "The water's warm," Junie observed, having waded to the front steps, despite Noah's warnings about staying dry. "That's the aquifer," Noah said, remembering his grandmother's explanations. "Spring-fed. It bubbles up from deep underground." As they approached the cabin, Noah could see that probably his grandmother, had made efforts to preserve what mattered most. The windows were boarded up properly, and a waterproof tarp covered a section of the roof. The front door hung slightly askew but was secured with a heavy padlock that looked relatively new. The key from his grandmother's envelope fit perfectly. Inside, the cabin felt like a time capsule. The floorboards were warped but solid, and most of Grandmother's belongings remained exactly where she'd left them. Her reading chair sat beside the stone fireplace, a hand-quilted blanket folded neatly across the arm. Her collection of herb-drying racks hung from the ceiling beams, still fragrant with lavender and sage. But it was the small writing desk by the back window that drew Noah's attention. On it sat a leather-bound journal, its pages yellow with age, but protected from moisture by a glass display, case the kind museums used for valuable documents. Junie noticed it too. "Grandma Meredith never showed us that before." Noah lifted the glass carefully and opened the journal to the first page. His grandmother's careful handwriting filled the margins around, pressed flowers and detailed botanical sketches. But it wasn't a typical gardening journal. The entries referenced test plots, controlled specimens, and regenerative properties. There were measurements, chemical formulas, and references to Father's original research. "Daddy, look at this," Junie called from near the fireplace. She was kneeling beside a loose floorboard, her small fingers tracing carved symbols that had been hidden beneath a braided rug. Noah joined her and saw what she'd found, intricate etchings in the wood that looked like a combination of botanical diagrams and geometric patterns. They were clearly carved deep and worn smooth by time. In the center was a symbol that matched one from the journal's first page. "Your great-great-grandfather was quite a man," Noah murmured, running his finger along the carved lines. He'd never heard much about his grandmother's father, only that he'd been involved with the university before the family moved to the cabin. Thunder rumbled overhead, and rain began pattering against the tin roof. Noah stood and surveyed their situation. They could drive back to Baton Rouge tonight, put the property up for sale, and use whatever small amount it brought to catch up on bills. It would be the practical choice, the safe choice. Or they could stay and try to understand what his grandmother had really left him. "We should head back before the rain gets worse," he said, though he made no move toward the door. "Can we come back tomorrow?" Junie asked. "I want to see what else is hidden." Noah looked at his daughter's eager face, then at the journal in his hands, then at the mysterious carvings beneath their feet. For the first time since the funeral, he felt something besides grief and worry. He felt curious. "We can do better than that," he said. "We can stay the weekend. If the cabin held together this long, it can handle 2 more days." As they prepared to bring their overnight bags in from the truck, Noah noticed something else, fresh tire tracks in the mud beside the gravel road. Someone else had been here recently, and they'd been careful to park out of sight from the main approach. His grandmother's final note suddenly felt less like a sentimental gesture and more like a warning. Saturday morning arrived with the kind of thick humidity that made the air feel solid. Noah woke on his grandmother's old couch to the sound of Junie splashing around outside, her laughter echoing off the water. Through the window, he could see her sitting on the cabin's front steps, her bare feet dangling in the warm spring water. "Careful, sweetheart," he called, pulling on his work boots. "Don't know what's under there." "Just crawfish and water plants," she replied, holding up a small crayfish that waved its claws indignantly. "Grandma Meredith taught me how to catch them without hurting them." Noah smiled and started coffee on his grandmother's old camp stove. The simple ritual felt grounding after a night of restless sleep filled with dreams of carved symbols and mysterious journals. This morning, in the gentle light filtering through cypress branches, the idea of hidden research and valuable discoveries seemed less likely. More probably, his grandmother had simply been an amateur botanist with a flair for dramatic note-writing. But as he sipped his coffee and watched Junie explore, Noah found himself studying the cabin with new eyes. The construction was more sophisticated than he'd initially noticed. The foundation pilings weren't just random cypress logs, they were precisely placed and engineered to work with the water flow rather than against it. The elevated design allowed the spring water to flow freely underneath, while keeping the living space dry during normal conditions. "Daddy, I think there's something under here," Junie called from the far corner of the cabin where the floorboards met the back wall. Noah set down his coffee and joined her. She was pointing to a section of flooring that looked different from the rest, newer boards that didn't quite match the weathered planks around them. When he knelt and pressed on the area, he could feel it give slightly. "Stand back a bit," he said, retrieving a crowbar from his toolbox. The newer boards came up easily, revealing a rectangular opening about 3 feet by 2 feet. Below was a wooden crate, carefully wrapped in oiled canvas and sealed with wax. It took both of them to lift it onto the cabin floor. Inside the crate, Noah found something that made his hands shake, a collection of scientific instruments that belonged in a university laboratory, not a swamp cabin. Glass beakers and test tubes, still clean and carefully organized. A microscope in its original wooden case. Measurement tools and scales precise enough for pharmaceutical work. And beneath it all, wrapped in more oiled cloth, a brass nameplate that read, "Louisiana Agricultural Research Station, Dr. Elias Thibodeau, 1952. "That was Grandma's daddy," Junie said, reading over his shoulder. "She told me he was real smart about plants." Noah stared at the nameplate. His great-grandfather hadn't just been involved with the university. He'd been running an official research station. Here, in what everyone now dismissed as a worthless swamp cabin. "Look at this," Junie said, lifting a leather portfolio from the bottom of the crate. Inside were dozens of detailed botanical drawings, each plant specimen numbered and dated. The artwork was museum quality, with notes in multiple languages and chemical formulas that Noah couldn't begin to understand. But what caught his attention were the handwritten observations in the margins. Specimen 47 shows remarkable cellular regeneration. Root extract demonstrates unprecedented healing properties. Must preserve samples for future analysis discovery, too important to lose. The final entry was dated December 15, 1953. Hurricane preparations complete. Research secured. Pray the future will understand what we've found here. Noah sat back on his heels, trying to process what they'd discovered. This wasn't amateur plant collecting. This was serious scientific research that had been deliberately hidden and preserved. His great-grandfather had discovered something significant enough to hide it from the world. "Daddy, there's more stuff down here," Junie said, peering into the opening they'd created. Noah looked and saw she was right. The cavity extended beneath several floorboards, and he could make out more containers in the shadows. This wasn't just a hiding place, it was a carefully designed storage system built into the cabin's structure. As they worked to extract more items, Noah began to understand the scope of what his great-grandfather had created. There were detailed maps of the surrounding wetlands, marked with locations of rare plant species, water quality reports spanning decades, correspondence with universities and government agencies, and most intriguingly, sealed vials containing plant specimens preserved in some kind of solution that had kept them intact for 70 years. One letter, dated 1953, caught Noah's attention. It was from a pharmaceutical company offering to purchase his great-grandfather's research for what would be millions in today's money. The handwritten response, "Never sent," was clipped to the back. "Some discoveries are too important to sell. This knowledge belongs to the land and its people, not to corporate profits. Your great-grandfather was protecting something," Noah said to Junie, who was carefully examining a preserved flower through a magnifying glass. "He hid all this research because he didn't want the wrong people to get it." "What kind of wrong people?" Before Noah could answer, they heard the sound of vehicles approaching on the gravel road. Through the window, he watched 2 black SUVs pull up beside his truck. 4 men in expensive suits climbed out, looking completely out of place in the swamp setting. The leader was a tall man with silver hair and the kind of confident bearing that came from always getting what he wanted. He approached the cabin with the careful steps of someone unaccustomed to walking in water. "Mr. Wells," he called out, "I'm Marcus Reed from Bayou Development Corporation. I was hoping we could have a conversation about your property." Noah stepped onto the porch, instinctively positioning himself between the strangers and Junie. "Didn't know anyone was expecting me out here." Reed smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Small communities talk, Mr. Wells. Word travels fast when someone inherits waterfront property, even property in this condition." He gestured at the tilting cabin with barely concealed disdain. "I represent investors who specialize in reclaiming damaged land. We'd like to make you an offer." "Property's not for sale. I haven't told you how much we're offering." Reed pulled out a folder and extracted a single sheet of paper. $50,000 cash closing within 30 days. That's generous considering the state of the structure and the environmental challenges. Noah glanced at the paper without taking it. 50,000 would solve his immediate problem: sketch, up the rent, fix the truck, maybe even put something aside for Junie's future. But something about Reed's eagerness made him suspicious. Why would developers want swampland that floods every season? "We see potential where others see problems," Reed replied smoothly. "Proper drainage, soil treatment, elevated construction. This could be valuable recreational property. But the offer expires Monday." "Daddy," Junie whispered from behind him, "should we tell him about?" "Time to go inside and finish our lunch," Noah interrupted, giving her a meaningful look. Whatever they'd discovered in the hidden compartment, he wasn't ready to share it with strangers who'd shown up uninvited. Reed's smile faded slightly. "Mr. Wells, I hope you'll consider our offer seriously. This land has been a burden to your family for too long. Sometimes it's better to let go of the past and embrace practical solutions." After the men left, Noah and Junie sat in the cabin's kitchen area, surrounded by the artifacts they'd discovered. The contrast was stark. Reed's corporate folder on the table beside his great-grandfather's careful research notes, modern greed next to old-fashioned scientific integrity. "Why didn't we tell them about the secret room?" Junie asked. Noah picked up one of the preserved plant specimens, noting how the solution had maintained its color and structure after 7 decades. "Because your great-great-grandfather went to a lot of trouble to keep this hidden. Until we understand why, we need to be careful who we trust." That evening, as rain drummed against the tin roof, Noah read through more of his great-grandfather's notes by lantern light. The research was extraordinary detailed documentation of plants with healing properties that modern science was only beginning to understand. There were references to anti-inflammatory compounds, cellular regeneration, even potential cancer treatments. One entry made him pause. "The marsh violet specimens show promise beyond anything we've seen. If properly cultivated and studied, this single species could revolutionize medical treatment. But corporate interests circle like vultures, must ensure knowledge serves humanity, not profit." The marsh violet. Noah remembered his grandmother, showing him those exact flowers during childhood visits, teaching him to identify their distinctive purple petals and heart-shaped leaves. She'd always been careful about where they walked, protecting certain areas from foot traffic. Now he understood why. She hadn't just been preserving her father's memory, she'd been guarding an active research site. "Junie," he said, closing the journal, "how would you feel about spending the summer here, really getting to know this place?" She looked up from her own exploration of the artifacts, her face brightening. "Could we fix it up, make it like Grandma Meredith's stories about the old days?" "We could try." Noah gazed around the humble cabin that had seemed so worthless just days ago. "But it won't be easy, and there might be people who don't want us here." "Like those men today?" "Maybe. Are you brave enough for that?" Junie considered this seriously, the way she approached all important questions. Then she nodded. "Grandma Meredith was brave, and she left this for us to take care of." Outside, lightning illuminated the swamp in stark white flashes, revealing the wild beauty his grandmother had spent her life protecting. Noah made his decision. Whatever his great-grandfather had discovered, whatever his grandmother had preserved, it was now his responsibility. The corporate developers could wait. This legacy deserved to be understood before it was sold. Sunday morning brought Dr. Sarah Chen to the cabin, in a mud-splattered jeep and knee-high rubber boots. Noah had found her name in his great-grandfather's correspondencia botanist from Tulane University, who'd been studying Louisiana wetland ecosystems for 15 years. "Your great-grandfather's research has been something of a legend in academic circles," she explained, carefully examining the preserved specimens through a portable microscope she'd brought. Dr. Elias Thibodeau published groundbreaking papers on medicinal plants in the 1950s, then suddenly stopped. The assumption was that he'd died or moved away. "He didn't die," Noah said. "He just went underground." Dr. Chen was a compact woman in her 40s with prematurely grey hair and the intense focus of someone who'd spent years studying things others overlooked. She handled each specimen with reverence, making notes in a waterproof field journal. "These preservation techniques are remarkable," she said, holding up a vial containing what looked like ordinary swamp grass. "The chemical composition appears completely intact. This is botanical time travel." Junie watched from her perch on a crate, fascinated by the scientific process. "Can you tell what makes them special?" "Some of these species shouldn't exist anymore," Dr. Chen replied. "Climate change, pollution, habitat destruction. We've lost dozens of medicinal plants over the past 50 years. But if these specimens are still viable..." She trailed off, lost in possibility. Noah had spent the early morning hours reading more of his great-grandfather's notes, trying to piece together the timeline. Elias Thibodeau had been conducting research on behalf of the Louisiana Department of Agriculture when he'd discovered something extraordinary in the wetlands surrounding his family's cabin. Instead of reporting his findings immediately, he'd spent 3 years documenting everything in meticulous detail. The final entries told a troubling story. Corporate interests had gotten wind of the research through government connections. Offers arrived weekly, each more aggressive than the last. Then came threats subtle at first, then explicit. Someone wanted the research badly enough to intimidate a university professor. "He was protecting more than just plants," Noah said, showing Dr. Chen the threatening letters he'd found. "He was protecting a way of life." The research revealed that the aquifer system beneath the cabin created a unique microenvironment. The combination of mineral-rich spring water, specific soil conditions, and protection from human interference had allowed rare plant species to thrive long after they'd vanished from other habitats. "It's like a natural laboratory," Dr. Chen explained. "Your great-grandfather didn't just find these plants, found an entire ecosystem that acts as a preservation system. As the day progressed, they made more discoveries. A section of the cabin's back wall concealed another compartment containing soil samples, water analysis reports, and detailed growth charts spanning several growing seasons. The data showed that plants grown in this specific location demonstrated healing properties significantly stronger than specimens from other areas. This explains the pharmaceutical interest. Dr. Chen said, if someone could isolate the environmental factors that enhance these properties, they could potentially recreate the conditions anywhere. Or destroy the original site trying, Noah replied, thinking about Marcus Reed's drainage and development plans. Late afternoon brought an unexpected visitor. Sheriff Tom Boudreau had known the family for decades, and his weather-beaten face showed genuine concern as he waded up to the cabin. Noah, I need to ask you about some reports we've been getting, he said, declining the offer of coffee but accepting a seat on the porch. Folks are saying you've been digging around out here, disturbing things. Disturbing what exactly? Property belongs to you fair and square, the sheriff continued, but there's been talk about environmental violations, unauthorized excavation. Some people are worried you might be doing damage to protected wetlands. Noah felt his temper rising. Protected by who? This land's been in my family for 70 years. I know that, son. But there's new regulations about disturbing archaeological sites, endangered species habitats. Just want to make sure you understand the rules. Dr. Chen spoke up. Sheriff, I can verify that Mr. Wells is conducting legitimate historical research. Everything we've found predates current environmental protections by decades. Boudreau nodded slowly. Appreciate that, Doc. Just wanted to give you a heads up. There's pressure coming from somewhere to take a closer look at what's happening out here. After the sheriff left, Noah and Dr. Chen sat in thoughtful silence. The implications were becoming clear. Someone knew about the research, knew enough to generate official complaints and apply legal pressure. The development company, Noah said, they're trying to force me out. Or they're trying to rush you into a decision before you understand what you really have, Dr. Chen replied. $50,000 is nothing compared to the value of this research. If pharmaceutical companies got hold of these specimens and data, we're talking about hundreds of millions in potential revenue. That evening, as Dr. Chen prepared to leave, she made Noah an offer. I'd like to bring a small team out here next weekend. Document everything properly, test the water and soil, verify your great-grandfather's findings. If this is what I think it is, you'll need scientific backing to protect it. What would that cost me? Nothing. If I'm right about the significance of this research, Tulane would be honored to partner with you on preservation efforts. This could be one of the most important botanical discoveries in Louisiana history. After Dr. Chen left, Noah and Junie spent the evening exploring more of the cabin's secrets. Behind the stone fireplace, they found another hidden compartment containing personal letters between Elias and his daughter Noah's grandmother. The letters revealed a father's love and concern for his family's future. Elias had known that his research would eventually be valuable, but he'd also known that corporate exploitation could destroy the delicate ecosystem he'd discovered. His solution had been to hide the research and train his daughter to protect it. When the time is right, one letter read, you'll know who to trust with this knowledge. Look for someone who loves the land more than money, who understands that some things are worth preserving, even when the world calls them worthless. Junie looked up from the letter she'd been reading. He was talking about you, Daddy. Noah felt the weight of 3 generations pressing on his shoulders. His great-grandfather had sacrificed his academic career to protect this discovery. His grandmother had spent 70 years maintaining the secret. Now it was his turn to decide what came next. Monday morning arrived, with Marcus Reed's deadline looming. Noah had made his choice, but he wanted to see how far the corporate pressure would go. He called the number on Reed's business card. Mr. Reed, Noah Wells. About your offer, I need more time to consider. The pause that followed was telling. Mr. Wells, I'm afraid the offer expires today. Market conditions change rapidly in land development. Then I guess we don't have a deal. That would be unfortunate. For everyone involved, Reed's tone had shifted from friendly persuasion to something harder. Sometimes property owners find that delaying decisions leads to complications they hadn't anticipated. The threat was subtle but clear. Noah hung up and looked around the cabin that had become both sanctuary and battlefield. Whatever happened next, he was committed to seeing it through. His phone rang 30 minutes later. Sheriff Boudreau again. "Noah, I'm afraid I've got some bad news. We've received a formal complaint about environmental violations on your property. State inspectors will be out there Wednesday morning." The original land survey maps that Dr. Chen brought Tuesday evening told a story that changed everything Noah thought he knew about his inheritance. Spread across the cabin's kitchen table, the yellow documents revealed that his great-grandfather's property wasn't just a simple homestead. It was positioned at the heart of a massive underground aquifer system that extended for miles beneath the surrounding wetlands. "This is extraordinary," Dr. Chen said, tracing the blue lines that marked underground water flow. "Your great-grandfather didn't just stumble onto medicinal plants. He identified the source of their unique properties, a natural filtration system that's been creating perfect growing conditions for centuries." The maps showed something else equally important: property boundaries that included water rights, extending far beyond the visible cabin site. While the cabin itself sat on just 2 acres, the mineral and water rights covered nearly 50 acres of prime wetland. "No wonder Reed wants this land," Noah muttered. "He's not planning to drain a small cabin site. He's looking at an entire ecosystem." Junie traced the water flow patterns with her finger, following the underground streams from their source to where they eventually joined the Gulf. "It's like the roots of a giant tree," she said. "Everything's connected." The survey maps also explained the precision of the cabin's placement. It wasn't built randomly on high ground. It was positioned at the exact center of the aquifer system, where the underground springs created maximum mineral concentration in the soil. "Your great-grandfather was brilliant," Dr. Chen said admiringly. "He built his research station at the optimal location for studying these phenomena. Every aspect of this property was chosen for scientific reasons." As they studied the documents, Noah found himself remembering childhood conversations with his grandmother that suddenly took on new meaning. Her stories about water that remembered where it came from hadn't been folklore. They'd been simplified explanations of complex hydrogeology. Her careful guidance about where they could walk and where they couldn't hadn't been arbitraries. She'd been protecting research plots that were still active. "She was continuing the research," he said aloud. "All those years after he died, she was still collecting data." Dr. Chen nodded toward a stack of more recent journals they'd found. "These notes go all the way to last year. She documented seasonal changes, tracked plant populations, even monitored water quality. This is a 70-year longitudinal study." The implications hit Noah like a physical blow. His grandmother hadn't just been a sweet old woman who loved gardening. She'd been a citizen scientist, maintaining one of the longest-running botanical studies in Louisiana history. And she'd done it alone, without recognition or support, because she understood the stakes. Wednesday morning brought the promised state inspectors, along with Marcus Reed and 2 men Noah didn't recognize. The inspection felt more like harassment than environmental protection officials measuring distances, taking photographs, and asking pointed questions about unauthorized excavation and disturbance of sensitive habitat. "Mr. Wells, these holes you've dug could constitute violations of the Wetlands Protection Act," the lead inspector said, examining the open floorboards where they'd found the research cache. "Those compartments were built in 1952, Noah replied calmly, "before any current environmental regulations. But accessing them without proper permits may still be problematic." Reed stood slightly apart, observing the proceedings with satisfaction. He'd orchestrated this pressure campaign, perfectly creating legal complications that would force Noah to choose between fighting bureaucracy or accepting a quick sale. But Noah had spent the previous evening reading more of his great-grandfather's notes, including detailed records of correspondence with early environmental protection groups. Elias Thibodeau hadn't just been a researcher, he'd been an early advocate for wetlands conservation. "Inspector," Noah said, producing a folder of documents Dr. Chen had helped him organize, "I'd like you to see something." The papers included Elias Thibodeau's original research permits, his correspondence with the Louisiana Department of Natural Resources, and most importantly, a conservation easement filed in 1954 that designated the property as a protected research site. "Your office should have these on file," Noah said as the inspector examined the conservation documents. "This property has been legally protected for 70 years. The inspector's demeanor changed immediately. He made several phone calls, spoke in hushed tones with his colleagues, and finally approached Noah with obvious embarrassment. "Mr. Wells, it appears there's been a misunderstanding. These documents supersede our current investigation. In fact, if this conservation easement is still valid, your property may be entitled to additional protections under current law." Reed's confident expression faltered. "I'm sure we can work through any administrative complications." "Actually, Mr. Reed," the inspector interrupted, "if this is designated conservation land, your development proposal would require extensive environmental impact studies and likely wouldn't be approved." After the officials left, Noah and Junie sat on the cabin's porch, watching the sun set through the cypress trees. The day's victory felt good, but Noah knew it was just the beginning. Reed wouldn't give up easily, and there would be other challenges ahead. "Daddy, are we going to live here?" Junie asked. "Would you want to?" She considered this seriously, the way she considered all important questions. "I like it here. It feels like Grandma Meredith is still around, watching over everything." That evening, Noah called his landlord in Baton Rouge and gave 30 days' notice on their apartment. The decision felt both terrifying and liberating. He was trading urban stability for rural uncertainty, but he was also choosing to honor a legacy that had been entrusted to his care. As he fell asleep on his grandmother's couch, Noah listened to the night sounds of the swamp frogs calling, water lapping against the cabin's foundation, wind stirring the cypress branches. For the first time in years, he felt like he was exactly where he belonged. His phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Some things are better left buried. Consider our offer while it's still on the table." Noah deleted the message and turned off his phone. Tomorrow, he would start learning everything he could about botanical research, conservation law, and the healing plants that had been waiting 70 years for someone to understand their true value. 2 weeks into June, Noah received a phone call that changed the stakes entirely. Dr. Chen's voice was tight with excitement and concern as she explained what her university lab had discovered about the plant specimens. "Noah, you need to sit down for this. The compounds we've isolated from your great-grandfather's marsh violet samples, they're showing cellular regeneration properties that we've never seen in nature. We're talking about potential treatments for degenerative diseases, accelerated wound healing, maybe even applications for cancer therapy." Noah was rebuilding the cabin's front steps, his hands already stained with wood preservative. Junie sat nearby, reading from one of their grandmother's journals and occasionally helping by handing him screws. "How sure are you?" he asked, pausing his work. "Sure enough that 3 pharmaceutical companies have contacted the university asking about our research. Someone leaked information about what we found." The implications hit Noah immediately. If corporations knew about the discovery, Reed's pressure campaign was just the beginning. They weren't dealing with simple land development anymore. They were sitting on what could be one of the most valuable botanical discoveries in modern history. "There's something else," Dr. Chen continued. "I found correspondence in the university archives between your great-grandfather and the early environmental movement. He wasn't just protecting his research, he was protecting it specifically from pharmaceutical exploitation." That evening, Noah drove to the nearest library with internet access and spent hours researching pharmaceutical patents and biopiracy cases. What he learned disturbed him. Companies routinely appropriated traditional plant knowledge, patented natural compounds, and profited from discoveries that belonged to indigenous communities or local ecosystems. His great-grandfather had seen this coming 70 years ago. The next morning brought unwelcome visitors. 2 men in federal badges knocked on the cabin door, identifying themselves as agents from the Fish and Wildlife Service. Mr. Wells, we're investigating reports of endangered species violations on this property, the senior agent said. He was a serious man with the kind of bureaucratic authority that could shut down Noah's life with paperwork. What endangered species? Louisiana iris, bog turtle habitat, several rare orchid species that are protected under federal law. Any disturbance of their habitat without proper permits is a serious offense. Noah felt the walls closing in. Every move he made to understand his inheritance triggered new legal complications. But as he listened to the agents describe the various protected species, he realized something important. They were describing exactly the plants his great-grandfather had been studying. "Agents, I'd like to show you something," he said, retrieving the conservation easement and research permits. "This property has been a protected research site since 1954. The federal investigation took most of the day, but it ended with validation rather than violation." The agents confirmed that Noah's property was not only legally protected, but was actually one of the oldest documented conservation sites in Louisiana. His great-grandfather's research had identified endangered species decades before they were officially recognized as threatened. "Mr. Wells," the senior agent said before leaving, "someone made serious accusations about habitat destruction on this property. But what we found is exactly the opposite. This is one of the best preserved examples of Gulf Coast wetland ecosystem we've seen." After the agents left, Noah sat with Junie on the cabin's newly repaired porch, watching the evening light filter through the cypress canopy. The constant pressure was wearing on him, but it was also clarifying his purpose. "Why are people trying so hard to make us leave?" Junie asked. "Because what we have here is valuable, and some people think valuable things should be sold to the highest bidder. What do you think?" Noah considered his daughter's question. 2 months ago, he would have taken Reed's offer without hesitation. $50,000 would have solved immediate problems and eliminated complicated responsibilities. But now, understanding what they were really protecting, the choice seemed obvious. "I think your great-great-grandfather was right. Some discoveries are too important to sell." That weekend, Dr. Chen returned with a small team of graduate students and additional equipment. They set up a temporary field station in the cabin's main room, turning Noah's inheritance into a functioning research laboratory. The work was painstaking and methodical. Every plant specimen had to be catalogued, photographed, and analyzed. Water samples were collected from multiple points in the aquifer system. Soil composition was mapped and tested. The students worked with the kind of focused intensity that reminded Noah of his grandmother's careful attention to detail. "We're not just confirming your great-grandfather's findings," Dr. Chen explained as she showed Noah the preliminary results. "We're discovering that his research was even more significant than he realized. The ecosystem here has continued evolving for 70 years, and some of the compounds we're finding are completely new to science." The financial implications were staggering. Dr. Chen estimated that the research data alone could be worth tens of millions to pharmaceutical companies. But the real value lay in the living ecosystem, a natural laboratory that could produce medical breakthroughs for generations if properly protected and studied. "Your great-grandfather made the right choice," she said. "If he'd sold this research in 1953, we might have gotten 1 or 2 useful drugs. But by preserving the entire system, he created something infinitely more valuable, a renewable source of medical innovation." As the sun set on Sunday, Noah watched the research team pack their equipment with the satisfaction of people who'd made important discoveries. But he also noticed something troubling: fresh tire tracks in the mud beyond their camping area. Someone had been watching their work from the tree line. That night, after everyone had gone, Noah found Junie sitting by the window with her grandmother's journal open on her lap. "Daddy, I found something else," she said quietly. "Look at this page." The journal entry was dated just 3 months before his grandmother's death. "Noah will need help when the time comes. The pressure will be stronger than what Daddy faced. Have reached out to old friends, people who remember why this matters. They'll know what to do." At the bottom of the page was a phone number and a name: Maya Lightfoot, Environmental Legal Defense Fund. Noah stared at the number, realizing that his grandmother had been preparing for this battle long before her death. She'd known that protecting the research would require more than just hiding IT, would require allies who understood how to fight corporate power with legal expertise. As he reached for his phone to call Maya Lightfoot, Noah heard vehicles approaching on the gravel road. 3 sets of headlights cut through the darkness, moving slowly and deliberately toward the cabin. The vehicles stopped just beyond the circle of light from the cabin's windows. Noah quickly moved Junie away from the front windows and reached for the shotgun his grandmother had kept beside the door, more for show than protection, but reassuring nonetheless. "Stay in the back room," he told Junie quietly. "If anything happens, you know where the boat is." But instead of confrontation, what emerged from the darkness was Maya Lightfoot and 2 companions who looked like they'd stepped out of an environmental activism documentary. Maya was a tall woman with silver-streaked hair and the confident bearing of someone who'd spent decades fighting legal battles for lost causes. "Noah Wells," she called out, "Meredith asked me to look after you when the time came. I think that time is now." Maya's companions introduced themselves as James Wright, a former EPA investigator turned environmental consultant, and Dr. Elena Rodriguez, a biochemist who specialized in pharmaceutical patent law. They'd driven from New Orleans after Dr. Chen contacted Maya about the research discovery. "Your grandmother and I worked together in the 1970s, Maya explained, as they gathered around the cabin's kitchen table. "She never told you about the legal battles back then." Noah shook his head. His grandmother had been private about her past, preferring to focus on present moments and future possibilities. "Bayou Development Corporation has been trying to acquire this property for 40 years, Maya continued. "They've used different names, different strategies, but it's always been the same corporate interest. They know exactly what's under this land." James Wright spread out a thick folder of documents. "We've been tracking their activities across the Gulf Coast. They specialize in acquiring wetland properties with unique ecological features, then exploiting those features for maximum profit while destroying the original ecosystems." Dr. Rodriguez added her own disturbing revelation. "I've seen their pharmaceutical division's internal documents through previous legal cases. They've been aware of your great-grandfather's research since the 1960s. Every offer they've made to your family has been based on their knowledge of the marsh violet's properties." The weight of this deception settled heavily on Noah's shoulders. His grandmother had lived with this pressure for decades, maintaining her father's secret while corporate interests circled like vultures, waiting for her to weaken or die. She protected this place her entire adult life. Maya said gently. She knew that eventually someone would have to make the final choice: preserve the research as your great-grandfather intended, or let it be commercialized and destroyed. Junie emerged from the back room, carrying her great-great-grandfather's final testamental document they'd discovered just that morning, hidden in a waterproof container beneath the cabin's foundation. The handwritten pages outlined Elias Thibodeau's complete vision for his research legacy. "He wanted it to be free," Junie said simply, holding up the testament. "Free for everyone to use." The document was remarkable in its foresight. Written in 1953, it described a legal structure that wouldn't be invented for another 20 years, an open-source research foundation that would make all discoveries freely available while protecting the source ecosystem from exploitation. "He was ahead of his time," Dr. Rodriguez said, studying the legal language. "This reads like a modern environmental trust." Maya smiled. "Meredith and I spent years updating his vision to work with current law. She was preparing for this moment long before she got sick." The next morning brought the first direct attack on Noah's character. The local newspaper ran a front-page story questioning his fitness as a parent and his right to endanger Junie by living in a structurally unsound dwelling in an isolated location. The article quoted anonymous sources expressing concern about a man with limited resources making reckless decisions that put his child at risk. Noah read the article 3 times, his anger building with each pass. Every detail was technically accurate, but presented in the worst possible light. Yes, the cabin needed repairs. Yes, he was struggling financially. Yes, they were living in a remote location. But the article painted him as an irresponsible dreamer rather than a father working to secure his daughter's future. "Daddy, why would someone write mean things about us?" Junie asked, reading over his shoulder. "Because some people think being scared is the same as being smart," Noah replied, folding the newspaper. "And sometimes scared people do things that hurt other people." The article's impact was immediate. By noon, Noah received a call from Child Protective Services requesting a welfare check on Junie's living conditions. His ex-wife called 20 minutes later, her voice sharp with accusation and barely concealed satisfaction. "I saw the newspaper, Noah. What are you thinking, dragging our daughter into some swamp fantasy? I want her back in Baton Rouge immediately." "Junie's fine, Rebecca. She's happier here than she's been in months. Living in a shack without proper plumbing or electricity, I'm calling my lawyer." The custody threat hit Noah where it hurt most. Rebecca had superior resources and a stable urban lifestyle. If she pushed for emergency custody modification, she might actually win. But when he hung up and turned to face Junie, he saw something in her expression that surprised him. Not fear or uncertainty, but determination. "I'm not going back," she said quietly. "This is where we belong." "Sweetheart, it might not be our choice." "Yes, it is." She held up her great-great-grandfather's testament. "He wrote that the research belongs to his family. That's us. Mama never cared about any of this." That afternoon, Maya Lightfoot provided the legal strategy that would protect both the research and Noah's custody rights. The conservation trust that Elias Thibodeau had envisioned could be established immediately, making Noah the official guardian of a protected research site rather than just a struggling single father living in a swamp. "Environmental guardianship comes with legal protections," Maya explained. "If you're the designated caretaker of a significant scientific site, courts are much less likely to consider that an unstable living situation." James Wright had been investigating Bayou Development Corporation's tactics and found a pattern of harassment campaigns designed to pressure property owners into quick sales. They've used the same playbook in 12 different cases across Louisiana. Anonymous complaints, negative media coverage, legal complications, anything to make ownership feel impossible. "But they've never faced a property with this level of legal protection," Dr. Rodriguez added. "Your great-grandfather's conservation easement and research permits create a legal fortress. As long as you're acting as a legitimate conservation guardian, they can't touch you." The transformation of the cabin continued throughout the week. Noah had quit his handyman job in Baton Rouge and thrown himself into restoration work with the kind of focused energy he hadn't felt in years. Each repair felt like an act of defiance against those who wanted him to fail. Junie proved to be an invaluable assistant, her small size allowing her to crawl into spaces Noah couldn't reach, and her careful attention to detail matching her great-great-grandfather's scientific precision. She catalogued every artifact they found, photographed each discovery, and maintained detailed notes that would make any researcher proud. "Look what I found," she announced Friday afternoon, emerging from beneath the cabin's raised foundation with a waterproof container covered in decades of mud. Inside was Elias Thibodeau's personal correspondence with environmental pioneers from the 1,950s people whose names Noah recognized from history books. Letters from Aldo Leopold, Rachel Carson, and other conservationists who'd understood that some discoveries were too important for private ownership. One letter, from Rachel Carson herself, made Noah's hands tremble. "Your research represents exactly the kind of knowledge that must be preserved for humanity, rather than exploited by commerce. The trust structure you've proposed could serve as a model for protecting other critical discoveries." "Daddy," Junie said, looking up from the letters, "these people were famous." "They were trying to save the world," Noah replied, "and your great-great-grandfather was helping them." That evening, as they worked by lantern light to organize the growing collection of documents and artifacts, Noah felt the full weight of his inheritance settling on his shoulders. This wasn't just about preserving family history or protecting valuable research. It was about carrying forward a vision of science and conservation that his great-grandfather had been willing to sacrifice his career to defend. The phone rang just as they were preparing for bed. Maya Lightfoot's voice was tense with urgency. "Noah, Bayou Development Corporation just filed a lawsuit claiming your great-grandfather's conservation easement was improperly executed. They're arguing that the property should revert to unrestricted development status." "Can they do that?" "They can try, but we've got 70 years of documented conservation activity and federal recognition of the site's scientific importance. The real question is whether you're ready for a fight that could take years to resolve." Noah looked around the cabin that had become home, at the research that represented 3 generations of dedication, at his daughter who'd found purpose and confidence in protecting their family's legacy. "I'm ready," he said, "whatever it takes." The hidden partnership agreement that Maya Lightfoot brought to the cabin on a sweltering July morning changed everything Noah thought he understood about his grandmother's life. The document, signed just 5 years earlier, revealed that Meredith Wells hadn't been protecting the research. Alonesh had been working with a network of environmental organizations to prepare for exactly the battle Noah now faced. "Your grandmother was more connected than you realized," Maya said, spreading the agreement across the kitchen table. "She'd been in contact with the Sierra Club, the Environmental Defense Fund, and 3 universities. They've all been waiting for someone to inherit the property who would continue her father's work." Noah stared at the signatures on the document, his grandmother's careful handwriting, alongside the names of people who wielded serious legal and financial power. The agreement outlined a support structure that included legal representation, scientific resources, and even funding for property maintenance and research continuation. "She knew I'd need help," he said, the realization hitting him like a physical blow. "She's been planning this for years." Junie looked up from her latest discovery, a collection of photographs showing the cabin during different decades. "Grandma Meredith was always planning. She said good plans take time to grow, like good gardens." The photographs told an amazing story. They showed the cabin and surrounding wetlands over a span of 70 years, documenting seasonal changes, plant growth patterns, and the gradual evolution of the ecosystem. But more importantly, they showed visitors, scientists, environmentalists, and researchers who'd been quietly studying the site for decades. "This has been an active research station all along." Dr. www. Chen said, examining photos that showed sophisticated field equipment and controlled growing areas. "Your grandmother wasn't just maintaining her father's work, she was expanding it." Maya pointed to a group photo from 1998 that showed his grandmother standing with a dozen other people beside the cabin. "Environmental Law Conference. Some of the most influential conservation lawyers in the country, all here to see what Meredith was protecting." The partnership agreement included something else that stunned Noah. A detailed financial analysis showing that multiple organizations had been contributing to a trust fund specifically designed to support whoever inherited the property. The account, managed by Maya's law firm, contained over $200,000. "We couldn't tell you about this until you decided to stay and fight," Maya explained. The trust was structured to activate only if the inheritor demonstrated genuine commitment to conservation, rather than just financial gain. Dr. Rodriguez had been quietly reviewing another set of documents. "Noah, there's something else you need to see. We've discovered why Bayou Development Corporation is so desperate to acquire this property." She laid out internal corporate communications that Maya's team had obtained through legal discovery in previous cases. The documents revealed that Bayou Development wasn't just a land development company. They were a front for a pharmaceutical conglomerate that had been tracking Elias Thibodeau's research for decades. "They know exactly what they're after," Dr. Rodriguez continued. They've been systematically acquiring properties throughout the Gulf Coast that show similar geological and botanical characteristics, trying to recreate the conditions your great-grandfather discovered here. Have they succeeded? No. The attempts failed because they didn't understand that the ecosystem can't be replicated artificially. The unique combination of factors here, the specific aquifer chemistry, the soil composition, the plant interactions developed over centuries, you can't just dig up the plants and move them somewhere else. This explained the escalating pressure and increasingly desperate tactics. Bayou Development wasn't just trying to buy valuable property, they were trying to acquire the only known source of potentially revolutionary medical compounds. The partnership agreement revealed one more crucial detail. His grandmother hadn't been working alone to resist corporate pressure. Several other property owners in the region had been coordinating their efforts, creating a network of protected sites that preserved critical wetland habitats. Your property is the keystone, Maya explained. The aquifer system that feeds your research site also supports conservation efforts on 6 other properties. If Bayou Development gets control of your land, they can disrupt the entire network. That evening, Noah and Junie walked the property boundaries with a new understanding of what they were protecting. The seemingly simple cabin site was actually the hub of a complex ecosystem that extended for miles underground. The spring water that bubbled up around their foundation fed into streams that nourished rare plants throughout the region. It's like the heart of the whole swamp, Junie observed, watching water flow from their spring into the wider wetlands. That's exactly what it is, Noah replied. And your great-great-grandfather figured that out 70 years ago. As they returned to the cabin, Noah noticed fresh activity on the neighboring property. Surveyors had been working there for several days, and now he could see the beginning of heavy construction equipment being moved into position. Maya had warned him about this tactic. They'll try to degrade the ecosystem from adjacent properties, she'd said. Drainage projects, chemical runoff, noise and vibration that disrupts wildlife patterns. Anything to make your conservation efforts appear ineffective. The next morning brought a visit from Tom Boudreau with news that confirmed Noah's worst fears. The sheriff looked uncomfortable as he delivered his message. Noah, I've got to ask you about something. There's been reports of trespassers on your property, people conducting unauthorized research activities. You mean Dr. Chen and her team? They have proper permits. That's not what the complaint says. According to this report, you've been allowing unlicensed individuals to conduct dangerous experiments with protected plant species. Noah felt the familiar surge of anger that came with being manipulated by people who thought they were smarter than him. Sheriff, every person who's worked on this property has been properly credentialed and legally authorized. I believe you, son, but the State Environmental Office has to investigate any formal complaints. They'll be out here Monday morning. After Boudreau left, Noah called Maya with the news. Her response was swift and reassuring. We expected this. I've already prepared a response that includes documentation of all research activities and permits. But Noah, I need to ask you something important. Are you prepared for this to get ugly? They're going to attack everything: your parenting, your finances, your competence. The goal is to make fighting seem more painful than surrendering. Noah looked at Junie, who was reading through more of her great-great-grandfather's correspondence with the focused attention of a scholar. In the past month, she'd learned more about science, conservation, and standing up for principles than most adults learned in a lifetime. They can attack me all they want, he said, but they're not getting this land. That weekend, the partnership network that his grandmother had built began mobilizing in earnest. Scientists arrived from 3 universities to document the ecosystem. Environmental lawyers filed protective motions with state and federal agencies. News outlets that specialized in conservation stories started covering the legal battle. Sunday evening brought the most surprising visitor yet. Dr. Margaret Forsyth, a renowned biochemist from Johns Hopkins, who'd flown to Louisiana specifically to see Elias Thibodeau's research. Your great-grandfather was a genius, she said after spending hours examining the preserved specimens and research notes. These compounds could revolutionize treatment for degenerative diseases. But more importantly, he understood that the real value lies in preserving the natural system that produces them. Dr. Forsyth's presence attracted attention from legitimate pharmaceutical companies who were interested in ethical research partnerships rather than hostile takeovers. Within days, Noah found himself fielding calls from biotech firms offering to fund conservation efforts in exchange for collaborative research opportunities. "This is how it should work," Dr. Forsyth explained. "Partnership instead of exploitation. Your great-grandfather's open-source vision could create medical breakthroughs while preserving the ecosystem for future generations." But the corporate pressure was intensifying as well. Construction noise from the neighboring property grew louder each day. Legal challenges multiplied. And someone had been spreading rumors in town that Noah was endangering his daughter by involving her in dangerous scientific experiments. The breaking point came when Rebecca arrived unannounced with a court order demanding immediate custody evaluation. She'd driven from Baton Rouge with a family court investigator and a camera crew from a local news station. "This stops now, Noah," she said, standing on the cabin's front porch with the authority of someone who'd never doubted her right to control other people's lives. "Junie belongs in a real home with proper schools and normal children, not playing scientist in some swamp laboratory." As the investigator documented their living conditions and the news cameras rolled, Noah realized that the battle for his grandmother's legacy had become inseparable from the battle for his daughter's future. Everything he loved was under attack simultaneously. But Junie surprised everyone. When the investigator asked her about her living conditions, she spoke with the confidence of someone who'd found her place in the world. "This is where my family's important work happens," she said clearly. "My great-great-grandfather discovered plants that can help sick people get better. My daddy and I are making sure that research helps everyone, not just rich companies." The investigator, a middle-aged woman who'd probably seen hundreds of custody disputes, looked genuinely impressed by Junie's articulate response. "And you feel safe here?" "Safer than anywhere else," Junie replied, "because we're doing something that matters." That night, after Rebecca and the investigators had left, Noah found the final piece of his grandmother's plan. Hidden in her bedroom, wrapped in plastic and tucked inside her old hope chest, was a complete legal brief prepared by Maya's law firm. It outlined every aspect of the Conservation Trust, included affidavits from dozens of scientists and environmentalists, and provided ironclad legal protection for both the research and Noah's custody rights. His grandmother had thought of everything. The only question was whether Noah had the courage to see her plan through to completion. The community petition that Maya brought to the cabin on the first Monday of August contained 847 signatures from residents across 3 parishes. Noah stared at the names, recognizing neighbors who'd mocked him just months earlier, local business owners who'd dismissed his grandmother as an eccentric old woman, and dozens of people he'd never met who'd somehow learned about his fight to preserve the research. "How did this happen?" he asked, scrolling through page after page of signatures. "Your story got out," Maya replied. "People understand what you're protecting now, and they understand what you're up against." The petition demanded that Bayou Development Corporation's lawsuit be dismissed and that Noah's property be granted additional protections under state environmental law. But more importantly, it represented a fundamental shift in community perception. Noah was no longer the fool trying to salvage a worthless swamp cabin. He was the guardian of something precious that belonged to everyone. Junie had been instrumental in this transformation. Her presentation to the parish school board about the historical and scientific significance of the research had been so compelling that teachers throughout the region were now bringing students to visit the site. Children who'd never shown interest in science were suddenly excited about botany and conservation. "Miss Junie, she's got a gift for explaining things," said Mrs. Doppler. Boudreau, the sheriff's wife, and a long-time parish school board member, made that research sound as important as anything you'd find in a big city museum. The educational outreach had an unexpected benefit. It generated media attention that couldn't be dismissed as biased or manipulated. When a 9-year-old explained the significance of preserving rare medicinal plants for future generations, even skeptical reporters had to take notice. Dr. Chen had returned with a full university research team, transforming the cabin into a field station that attracted scientists from across the southeast. Their work validated everything Elias Thibodeau had documented and revealed new discoveries that made the site even more valuable. "We've identified compounds that don't exist anywhere else in nature," Dr. Chen explained to the growing group of supporters who gathered for weekly updates. The marsh violet specimens from this specific location show cellular repair properties that could lead to treatments for Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, and other degenerative conditions. But the pharmaceutical implications weren't what excited the research team most. They discovered that the aquifer system created conditions that could potentially restore damaged wetlands throughout the Gulf Coast. The cabin wasn't just producing medicinal plants, it was demonstrating how healthy ecosystems could heal themselves and support human communities. "Your great-grandfather didn't just discover valuable plants," Dr. Rodriguez explained during one of her regular legal strategy sessions. "He discovered a model for sustainable development that could revolutionize how we think about conservation and commerce." The stakes had grown beyond anything Noah could have imagined when he'd first inherited the flooded cabin. Environmental groups were citing the site in federal legislation. Medical researchers were requesting access to study the unique compounds. Educational institutions wanted to establish permanent field stations. And Bayou Development Corporation was pulling out every legal and political weapon at their disposal to stop it. The corporate lawyers had filed injunctions, attempting to halt all research activities. They'd lobbied state politicians to question the university's permits. They'd even hired private investigators to dig into Noah's personal history, looking for anything that could undermine his credibility as a conservation guardian. "They're scared," Maya said with satisfaction. "Desperate people do desperate things, and they're running out of options." The legal battle centered on a Friday hearing in federal court that would determine whether Elias Thibodeau's conservation easement was valid and whether Noah's activities constituted legitimate scientific research, unauthorized commercial exploitation. "Everything depends on this hearing," Maya explained as they prepared their case. "If we win, the property gets permanent federal protection and the research can continue. If we lose, Bayou Development gets a clear path to acquisition and development." Noah spent Thursday evening walking the property boundaries with Junie, taking in the full scope of what they'd been protecting. The summer's work had transformed not just the cabin, but the entire site. The research plots were clearly marked and thriving. The cabin itself had been restored to better condition than it had enjoyed in decades. Solar panels provided clean electricity, and a sophisticated water filtration system ensured that their activities didn't impact the sensitive aquifer. "It doesn't look like the same place," Junie observed, comparing their current view to photographs from just 6 months earlier. "It's becoming what it was always meant to be," Noah replied, "a place where science and nature work together." The evening brought unexpected news from Dr. Chen. Her team's latest analysis had revealed something extraordinary. The marsh violet plants weren't just producing known medicinal compounds, they were evolving new ones in response to environmental changes. "The ecosystem is actively adapting," she explained excitedly. "As conditions change, the plants develop new chemical defenses and healing properties. This isn't just a repository of existing knowledge, it's a laboratory for discovering future medical treatments." This revelation attracted attention from the National Institutes of Health and the Centers for Disease Control. Federal scientists wanted to establish a permanent monitoring station to track how the ecosystem responded to climate change and environmental pressures. "You're not just preserving the past," Dr. Forsyth told Noah during a conference call with federal researchers. "You're protecting humanity's ability to adapt to future challenges." The irony wasn't lost on Noah. A property that Bayou Development claimed was worthless swampland was actually a natural resource of incalculable value to medical science and environmental protection. Friday morning arrived with the weight of 3 generations resting on the outcome of a single court hearing. Noah, dressed in his only good suit purchased for his grandmother's funeral and now pressed into service for defending her legacy. Maya had assembled an impressive legal team, but she'd also done something more important. She'd arranged for the courtroom to be filled with people whose lives had been touched by the research site. Teachers brought students who'd participated in educational programs. Local residents came to support their neighbors' fight against corporate intimidation. Scientists traveled from multiple universities to testify about the site's importance. As they drove toward the courthouse in New Orleans, Noah felt the same mixture of nervousness and determination he'd experienced before every important moment in his life: his wedding, Junie's birth, his grandmother's funeral. "Daddy, are you scared?" Junie asked from the passenger seat. "A little," he admitted, "but I'm more excited than scared." "Why?" Noah thought about his answer as they crossed the bridge over Lake Pontchartrain, heading toward a courtroom where judges would decide whether scientific discovery belonged to corporate profits or community benefit. "Because we're about to find out if doing the right thing is stronger than having the most money." The courthouse steps were crowded with supporters when they arrived. Noah recognized faces from the community meetings, the research teams, and the educational programs that had grown around the cabin site. But he also saw corporate lawyers, development company executives, and lobbyists who represented the kind of money that usually won these battles. Maya squeezed his shoulder as they climbed the courthouse steps. "Your grandmother would be proud." "She'd probably be surprised too," Noah replied. "I don't think she expected the quiet kid she raised to end up fighting pharmaceutical companies in federal court." "Actually," Maya said with a smile, "she told me years ago that you were the most stubborn person she'd ever met. She said once you decided something was worth protecting, nothing could make you let go." As they entered the courtroom that would determine the future of 3 generations of scientific work, Noah realized that his grandmother had been right about more than just medicinal plants. She'd understood that the most valuable discoveries weren't meant to be owned, they were meant to be shared. Federal Judge Patricia Morrison had a reputation for cutting through legal complexity to find the human truth at the heart of complicated cases. As she reviewed the stacks of documents that represented both sides of the dispute, Noah could see her trying to understand how a simple property inheritance had become a battle over the future of medical research. "Mr. Reed," she said, addressing the Bayou Development Corporation's lead attorney, "help me understand your client's position. You're arguing that a conservation easement filed in 1954 should be invalidated because the property owner didn't follow environmental procedures that weren't enacted until the 1970s. Reed's lawyer, a sharp-dressed man from a New Orleans corporate firm, stood with the confidence of someone accustomed to winning through procedural technicalities. "Your Honor, the easement was improperly executed according to current environmental law. Our client has legitimate development rights that are being blocked by outdated and legally questionable restrictions." "And your client's development plans would involve what exactly?" "Drainage and reclamation of unusable wetland, followed by construction of recreational facilities that would benefit the entire community through job creation and tax revenue." Judge Morrison turned to Maya. "Ms. Lightfoot, your response." Maya stood with the measured authority of someone who'd spent decades fighting these battles. "Your Honor, Bayou Development Corporation's real interest isn't community development. It's acquiring control of a unique ecosystem that produces compounds worth hundreds of millions to pharmaceutical companies." She presented the court injunction papers that her team had prepared documents that would permanently halt development and establish the property as a protected research site. The injunction was supported by affidavits from scientists at 6 universities, environmental groups across 3 states, and federal agencies responsible for protecting endangered species. "Mr. Wells inherited more than property," Maya continued. "He inherited a 70-year scientific legacy that belongs to the public good, not private profit." Judge Morrison called Dr. Chen to testify about the scientific significance of the site. Dr. Chen's presentation was clear and compelling. explaining how the unique aquifer system created irreplaceable conditions for botanical research. Your Honor, this isn't just about preserving old research. Dr. Chen said, the ecosystem continues to evolve and produce new compounds. Destroying it would be like burning down a library that's still writing new books. The pharmaceutical company representatives testified next, arguing that private development was necessary to fund the expensive research required to bring new medicines to market. Their expert witness, an industry consultant, presented charts showing how corporate investment had accelerated medical breakthroughs in other cases. But Maya's cross-examination revealed the weakness in their argument. Dr. Patterson, in how many of these corporate-funded cases were the original discoveries made freely available to other researchers? Well, intellectual property protections are necessary to incentivize. Please answer the question. How many? None, but... And in how many cases were the source ecosystems preserved for future research? The consultant's uncomfortable silence spoke louder than any verbal answer. When Noah was called to testify, he felt the weight of the packed courtroom behind him. Junie sat in the front row next to Maya, giving him the kind of encouraging smile that made everything seem possible. "Mr. Wells," Maya said, "tell the court why you chose to honor your great-grandfather's conservation vision rather than accept a profitable development offer." Noah looked at the judge, then at the corporate lawyers who'd been trying to intimidate him for months, then at his daughter who'd taught him that courage came from protecting things that mattered. "Your Honor, my great-grandfather discovered something that could help people heal from terrible diseases. He could have sold that discovery and made himself rich, but he chose to preserve it for everyone. My grandmother spent 70 years protecting that choice, even when it would have been easier to give up." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "I'm not a scientist or a lawyer. I'm just a handyman who inherited more responsibility than he expected. But I've learned that some things are too important to sell, even when selling would solve all your immediate problems." "And what about your daughter's welfare?" the corporate lawyer interjected during cross-examination. "Isn't providing stability and financial security more important than pursuing idealistic environmental goals?" Noah felt his temper rise, but Maya's coaching kept his voice steady. "My daughter is getting an education about science, conservation, and standing up for principles that most kids never get. She's learning that the most valuable things in life aren't for sale." The corporate lawyer pressed harder. "But Mr. Wells, you've given up steady employment, exposed your child to legal battles and media attention, and chosen to live in a remote location without proper amenities. How is that responsible parenting?" "Because I'm teaching her that protecting something important is worth fighting for, even when the fight is difficult." Judge Morrison called a brief recess before closing arguments. As Noah rejoined Junie and Maya in the courthouse hallway, he could see the corporate team huddled in urgent conversation. Their confident demeanor had shifted to something that looked like concern. "How do you think it's going?" Noah asked Maya. "Judge Morrison is asking the right questions," she replied. "But corporate lawyers don't give up easily. They'll try one more angle in closing arguments." Junie tugged on Noah's sleeve. "Daddy, win or lose, I'm proud of what we did." Noah hugged his daughter, realizing that she was right. Regardless of the court's decision, they'd honored his grandmother's trust and protected something precious for as long as they could. The Environmental Research Foundation charter that Judge Morrison signed that afternoon represented more than a legal victory. It established a new model for protecting scientific discoveries while making them available for the public good. The document created the Thibodeau-Wells Conservation Research Foundation, with Noah as the founding director and permanent protections that no future corporate interest could overturn. This court finds that the plaintiff has demonstrated exceptional stewardship of a resource of significant scientific and environmental value, Judge Morrison announced as she signed the charter. The conservation easement executed by Dr. Elias Thibodeau in 1954 is hereby validated and expanded to include permanent federal protection status. The courtroom erupted in applause from the supporters who'd traveled to New Orleans for the hearing. Noah felt Junie's small hand slip into his as they watched their grandmother's 70-year plan finally come to fruition. But Judge Morrison wasn't finished. She turned to address the Bayou Development Corporation representatives directly. As for the corporate interests attempting to acquire this property through legal intimidation and environmental manipulation, this court is ordering a full investigation into your tactics. Deliberately filing false environmental complaints and coordinating harassment campaigns against property owners constitutes abuse of legal process. Marcus Reed's face had gone pale as the judge continued. Your development activities on adjacent properties will be suspended pending environmental impact review. If this court finds evidence of deliberate ecosystem disruption, criminal charges may follow. The corporate legal team was already packing their briefcases and heading for the exit before the judge finished speaking. Their carefully orchestrated pressure campaign had not only failed, it had exposed them to legal consequences they hadn't anticipated. Outside the courthouse, Maya addressed the crowd of supporters with the satisfaction of someone who'd spent decades fighting for moments like this. Today, we proved that community determination can overcome corporate greed, she said. The Thibodeau Wells Foundation will serve as a model for protecting scientific discoveries while ensuring they benefit everyone, not just shareholders. Dr. Chen announced that Tulane University would be establishing a permanent research partnership with the foundation, providing resources and expertise while respecting the open-source principles that guided the work. We're not just continuing Dr. Thibodeau's research, she said. We're expanding it. The foundation will study ecosystem restoration, medicinal plant cultivation, and sustainable development practices that other communities can adopt. The drive back to the cabin felt different than any journey Noah had made in his adult life. Instead of running from problems or chasing impossible dreams, he was returning home to work that mattered, with the resources and support needed to succeed. "Daddy, what happens now?" Junie asked, as they turned onto the familiar gravel road. "Now we do the work your great-great-grandfather started," Noah replied. "We learn everything we can about these plants and this ecosystem, and we share what we learn with people who can use it to help others. And we get to keep living here forever, if that's what you want." The cabin looked different in the late afternoon, light not like a desperate refuge from financial problems, but like the headquarters of an important scientific mission. The solar panels glinted in the sun, the research plots showed green and healthy growth, and the spring water bubbled up from underground, with the promise of discoveries yet to be made. That evening, Noah and Junie hosted a celebration dinner for everyone who'd supported their fight. Maya brought champagne for the adults and sparkling cider for Junie. Dr. Chen brought her research team. James Wright and Dr. Rodriguez came with legal documents that would protect the foundation from future challenges. As the sun set through the cypress trees and the gathering moved from the cabin to the front porch, Noah felt a peace he hadn't experienced since childhood. The legal battles were over, the corporate threats had been neutralized, and the research that 3 generations had protected was finally secure. "Speech!" someone called out, and the group turned to Noah expectantly. He stood with Junie beside him, looking out at faces that had become family over the course of their fight. "6 months ago, everyone thought I was crazy for trying to fix up a flooded cabin," he began. "Maybe I was crazy, but sometimes crazy is just another word for caring about something more than money." He gestured toward the cabin and the wetlands beyond. "My great-grandfather could have been rich. My grandmother could have lived an easier life. But they chose to protect something that belonged to everyone. Tonight, we're celebrating their choice and our chance to carry it forward." The applause was warm and sustained, but what moved Noah most was the expression on Junie's face. She looked proud not just of their victory, but of the work they'd done together and the principles they'd defended. As the evening wound down and guests began heading back to town, Maya pulled Noah aside for 1 year later, Noah stood before the bronze dedication plaque that marked the entrance to the Thibodeau Wells Conservation Research Center. reading the inscription that honored 4 generations of environmental stewardship, in memory of Dr. Elias Thibodeau, who discovered that nature's greatest gifts are meant to be shared, and Meredith Wells, who protected those gifts for future generations, dedicated to the principle that scientific knowledge belongs to humanity. The transformation of the property had exceeded everyone's expectations. The original cabin remained at the center of the complex, fully restored and serving as Noah's residence and the Foundation's administrative headquarters. Around it, a carefully designed research campus had grown organically from the landscape solar-powered laboratories, greenhouse facilities for controlled plant cultivation, and dormitories for visiting researchers, all connected by elevated walkways that allowed the natural water flow to continue undisturbed. Junie had thrived in her new role as the Foundation's youngest educator. At 10, she could explain complex botanical concepts to visiting school groups with a kind of enthusiasm that made science accessible and exciting. Her presentation about how plants could heal both people and damaged ecosystems had been featured in educational videos that were now used in classrooms across the Southeast. "Dad, the morning tour group is here," she announced, appearing in Noah's office doorway with the clipboard she used to keep track of daily activities. The organized efficiency she'd inherited from her great-great-grandfather had made her indispensable to the Foundation's educational programs. Noah smiled and joined her on the front porch of the original cabin, where 20 students from a New Orleans high school waited with their biology teacher. These weekly tours had become one of his favorite responsibilities, sharing the story of how scientific curiosity and environmental protection had created something beneficial for everyone. "Before we start," he said to the group, "I want you to look around and tell me what you see." The students offered various observations: old trees, clear water, birds, flowers, all accurate but incomplete. "You're looking at a 70-year experiment in how human communities can work with natural ecosystems instead of against them," Noah explained. "Everything here, the research, the conservation, the education programs grew from one man's decision to protect knowledge instead of selling it." The tour followed the path that Noah and Junie had developed over months of hosting visitors. They started at the spring source, where the aquifer system bubbled up from underground, explaining how unique mineral content created perfect growing conditions for rare plants. They visited the greenhouse, where botanists were cultivating medicinal species that had been extinct in the wild, working to restore them to other suitable habitats. The highlight was always the main laboratory, where Dr. Chen's team continued the research that Elias Thibodeau had begun. The work had produced 3 significant medical discoveries in the past year, with patents held by the Foundation and licensing agreements that ensured the resulting treatments would be affordable and widely available. "The goal isn't to get rich from these discoveries," Dr. Chen explained to the student group. "The goal is to prove that scientific research can serve community benefit while remaining financially sustainable." After the tour, as the students departed with the kind of excitement that comes from seeing big ideas made real, Noah and Junie walked their favorite evening route around the property boundaries. The work never felt finished. There was always more to learn, more to protect, more to share, but it felt purposeful in a way that Noah's previous jobs never had. "Do you miss Baton Rouge?" he asked Junie as they paused beside the research plots where marsh violets bloomed in carefully tended abundance. "I miss some of my friends," she said thoughtfully. "But I like having work that matters. And I like that people come here to learn things they can't learn anywhere else." The Foundation had attracted international attention from researchers studying sustainable development and community-based conservation. Delegations had visited from universities in Costa Rica, Kenya, and Thailand, places where similar conflicts between corporate exploitation and environmental protection were playing out. "Your model is being replicated worldwide," Dr. Rodriguez had told Noah during her last visit. "Communities are using the Foundation's legal structure to protect their own traditional knowledge and natural resources." This global impact had been unexpected but deeply satisfying. Noah's decision to honor his grandmother's trust had created ripple effects that extended far beyond Louisiana wetlands. As they returned to the cabin for dinner, Noah reflected on how completely his understanding of success had changed. A year ago, success meant paying bills on time and providing basic stability for Junie. Now it meant stewarding a legacy that would benefit people he'd never meet, in places he'd never visit, for generations beyond his own lifetime. The Foundation's work had also healed relationships in ways Noah hadn't anticipated. Rebecca had visited twice, bringing Junie's half-sister to see the research center and participate in educational programs. The bitterness from their divorce had softened into respect for the work Noah was doing and the environment where Junie was thriving. "I was wrong about this place," Rebecca had admitted during her last visit, "and I was wrong about what you were capable of." The evening brought the kind of peaceful satisfaction that Noah had never experienced in his previous life. As he and Junie sat on the front porch, listening to the night sounds of the swamp and reviewing the day's research notes, he felt the presence of the generations who'd made this moment possible. "Grandma Meredith would like seeing us here," Junie said, reading from her latest journal entry about plant growth patterns. "She is seeing us," Noah replied, watching fireflies begin their nightly dance above the spring water. "Every time we choose to protect something instead of selling it, every time we share knowledge instead of hoarding it, we're continuing her work." The bronze plaque by the Foundation entrance would weather and age, but the principles it represented had taken root in soil that would nourish them for generations. Noah Wells had inherited a flooded cabin and discovered that the most valuable things in life were the ones that couldn't be bought or sold, only protected, shared, and passed forward with love.